Following a lengthy legal battle and nearly 800 days of house arrest, Steven Donziger was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison on criminal contempt charges. The 6 months, which is the maximum sentence allowed, is in addition to Donziger's 2 years and 2 months of home detention, which the UN deemed a violation of international law just days before his sentencing. In her ruling, Judge Loretta Preska said, quote, "It seems that only the proverbial 2x4 between the eyes will instill in Donziger any respect for the law." Here's what Steven had to say.
So here I am, convicted of a misdemeanor, the lowest level misdemeanor, by the way, a petty offense, and I'm already 2 years and 2 months in house arrest. Now there'll be another 6 months of prison, according to Judge Preska, on top of that, when the maximum sentence ever given a lawyer who's been convicted of my crime is 90 days of home confinement. I've always said this is a retaliation case designed to punish me for my successful advocacy on behalf of indigenous groups in Ecuador against Chevron, and I think it was borne out today.
Joining us now to discuss is Marianne Williamson, an author, activist, podcast host, and former U.S. presidential candidate. Welcome back to Rising.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so you've been following this case closely. Can you walk people through why it is that the legal system, and particularly through this judge, are so furious with Donziger that they would give him a maximum sentence here, even after he'd served more than 2 years on these, waiting for this conviction?
Judge Preska is expressing the outrage of Chevron and, by extension, all oil companies at the audacity of Steven Donziger and, by extension, the entire environmentalist movement to challenge its hegemony. If they want to go down to Latin America and poison areas of the Amazon, which spews carcinogens into the water and into the food and into the air of indigenous farmers, then what? I suppose they should have a right. And if Steven Donziger or any other human rights activist or lawyer actually takes this to the courts and actually gets the Ecuadorian Supreme Court to hand down a judgment of $9.5 billion, oh, then they're really angry. And they're not going to pay that money, they say, which they could have done over and over by now, for less money than they have paid to prosecute Steven Donziger. Instead, they come after Steven Donziger, and it's meant to have a chilling effect on any of us in the environmental movement or just citizens of the planet who say this has got to stop.
Several major political figures have come to Donziger's defense, including Representative Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, who tweeted, "This is not justice. It's the executives at Chevron who polluted campesino communities, put lives at risk in Ecuador, and then dodged responsibility, who should be behind bars." That's a powerful statement on his behalf. And, you know, this judge said, her quote that we read earlier, the proverbial 2x4 between the eyes, it's almost a violent kind of imagery. There, you know, she's saying that it's Donziger who has broken the law or evaded the law and needs to be held. We need justice. And isn't that an exact inversion of the situation?
Oh, it absolutely is. You rarely hear that kind of personal animus coming out of the mouth of a judge. She is speaking not for the U.S. justice system there. She is speaking for Chevron. As Steven pointed out in the clip that you showed, this is a Class B misdemeanor. It is outrageous. No one has ever been given this kind of a sentence. No, she's coming down on him hard. And I think that Representative McGovern made a very good point. It is the executives in Chevron who should be in jail here for purposely, well, it was Texaco at the time. We know that those executives purposefully refused to line those pits in their oil drilling practices against not only, I mean, this was Ecuadorian environmental standards, which were lower than U.S. standards, in order to save $3 a pit. This was criminal activity. And by the way, remember, as you've already pointed out on this program, the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights has said that this is arbitrary detention. Amazon Watch has voiced their outrage. Greenpeace, Amnesty International. But we need to hear more. There need to be more Jim McGoverns. And ultimately, who we need to hear from is Merrick Garland and President Joe Biden. You know, I'd like to point out that when the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights decried arbitrary detention in Iran, The U.S. went all nuts about it. The U.S. State Department in 2018 weighed in. The fact that the U.S. State Department, anyone in the U.S. government, is simply choosing to ignore a statement by the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, I'd like to point out to a lot of people, I think, in the neoliberal establishment, that if the Trump administration was doing this, we'd be all upset and in arms. How dare they ignore an international body like this? And we should hold Merrick Garland and Joe Biden accountable to the same human rights standards.
And I think you made a great point by pointing to the very facts of the case, because Chevron in the United States has said this was a crooked third world country where they bribed a judge to just railroad us into this judgment. But all you have to do is look at the basic facts of the case and see that, okay, you claim that you were just railroaded here. The facts show, and your own internal documents show, that you were aware of the risks to the community, and you made the decision to move forward anyway because it was more profitable for you to do so. So, in that sense, to me, all of this talk is a complete distraction. What was the mechanism that Chevron was able to use in the U.S. to get away with this play?
I think that the mechanism that they're able to use has to do with the fact that when the New York courts decided to take a pass on this misdemeanor charge, Judge Lewis Kaplan was able to find a loophole that I think most Americans are outraged to find even exists, where he was able to turn the prosecution over to Chevron to allow a corporation to basically take over the U.S. judiciary and prosecute. Remember, this was Judge Preska is tied to the Federalist Society. This is a Chevron prosecution. The law firm that prosecuted, this is Chevron's prosecution. And also, when you were talking about crooked third world country, first of all, Americans aren't buying that anymore. More people understand what the United States, and particularly American corporations, have been doing in Latin America for decades. So that doesn't play quite the way it once did. But also, the person who said that they were in the room and they heard Steven Donziger try to bribe the judge later recanted his story. We know this. So this is just false from the top to the bottom. And now, of course, they are trying to claim that Steven Donziger violated the law. No, it is Chevron who has violated and is violating the law, and they are violating something much more important than the law, and that is the health and the well-being of thousands of farmers in Ecuador.
Right, and again, we're not even, now what's being ruled on isn't even any, what Chevron should be held to, but just the idea that someone trying to call attention to this, acting in a journalistic capacity, should be sentenced and punished this dramatically, contrary to kind of all previous understanding of how these things should work at Chevron's behest. And that, so that can be, don't you think that can be wrong and outrageous even on its own?
Well, it wasn't a journalistic capacity, but for a human rights activist, an environmental lawyer. Remember, Steven Donziger was heading a team that did use the courts. He did respect the legal process. It is Chevron that is not respecting the legal process. But absolutely, much like with Assange, much like with Steven Donziger, I think we all need to step back here and realize the ways in which this is bigger than just Steven Donziger. It is bigger than any one human being who is a whistleblower or an activist or a lawyer that crosses, that challenges the dominance of these huge multinational industrial tyrants, because that is what they are at this point. Whether it has to do with the environmentalist movement, whether it has to do with the defense contractors, we're living at a moment where the people are standing up, where the people are rising up, where people are realizing what's going on. And when we see a Steven Donziger, we realize, as I say all the time, what they can do to anybody, they can do to you. This is an assault on freedom. This is an assault on liberty. This is an assault on the rule of law. And this is an assault on every American who cares to draw a line in the sand and say, you must stop doing this to the planet. You must stop doing this to the people who live here and other species, whether you're Chevron, in Steven Donziger, whether you are Exxon bribing Congress people, or whether it's Amplify Energy and Gas and their 8,000 acre oil spill in Huntington Beach, California yesterday. It's all a part of the same picture.
Yeah, happening right now, and truly incredible abuse of power. Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.